The air inside the stadium was heavy, thick with the kind of humidity that only 40,000 bodies can generate. But there was something else underneath the sweat and the stale popcorn smell, a low-frequency anxiety that hadn't been there an hour ago. It was the main event of SummerSlam 2026, a match that had been built up for months as the dawn of a new, clean era for the company. The champion, a polished corporate-approved Technicon, stood in the center of the ring, his chest heaving, holding the gold up to the rafters, while pyrotechnics sizzled and faded into gray smoke. The broadcast team was doing their job, shouting superlatives, trying to sell the idea that this was the pinnacle of the sport, the happy ending everyone wanted. The crowd wasn't buying it. There was a disconnect. Could feel it in the way the cheers didn't quite reach the upper decks, the way the applause died out too quickly, leaving an awkward, hollow silence that the production trucks frantically tried to fill with replays and sweetening audio. Then, the screens flickered. It wasn't the flashy produce glitch effect that WWE had overused for years to signal a spooky character. This looked like a legitimate technical failure. The massive LED boards ringing the stadium went black, not simultaneously, but in a cascading failure, dying out section by section until the only light came from the house rigs high above. The commentary feed, usually a constant stream of polished branding, cut out mid-sentence. For 10 seconds, there was no sound but the confused murmuring of 40,000 people realizing the show had gone off the rails. It wasn't excitement. It was confusion. Security guards near the barricade looked at each other, hands touching their earpieces, their faces betraying a lack of instruction. The referee in the ring lowered his hand. The champion looked toward the entrance ramp, not with defiance, but with genuine irritation, assuming the production truck had blown the big send-off. The silence stretched too long. In television, 2 seconds of dead air is an eternity. 10 seconds is a disaster. This was approaching a minute. The uneasy atmosphere curdled into something darker. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards, a sound so deep it was felt in the chest rather than heard. It wasn't music. It was the sound of a feedback loop, a mechanical groan that grew louder and louder until it became uncomfortable. The audience stopped looking at the ring and started looking at the exits, a primal instinct kicking in that whispered something was wrong. This wasn't a show anymore. The scripted reality had fractured, and through the cracks, something cold and uninvited was seeping in. The camera operators, usually invisible, were caught on the localized monitors, lowering their lenses, unsure where to point. The champion in the ring dropped his character completely, walking to the ropes to shout at a timekeeper, his voice audible and angry without a microphone. And then the hum stopped. The snap of silence was violent, ringing in the ears of every person in the building, creating a vacuum that begged to be filled. When the first note hit, it wasn't a roar of guitar or a bombastic orchestral swell. It was a single, discordant piano key, struck with a heaviness that echoed like a gavel sentencing a prisoner. Then the rhythm kicked in slow, methodical, and suffocating. It was a distorted, slowed-down version of a theme song the world hadn't heard in 2 years. Stripped of its majesty and replaced with a dirge-like menace, the reaction wasn't a pop, wasn't the joyous explosion of nostalgia that usually greets a returning legend. It was a collective gasp, a sound of disbelief that sucked the oxygen out of the arena. The crowd didn't stand up to cheer. They stood up to see if their eyes were lying to them. Walking through the curtain, without pyro, without a light show, without the pomp and circumstance of a superstar, was a figure dressed in plain black street clothes. He looked leaner, older, his face covered in a thick, unkempt beard that hid the arrogant smirk the world used to hate. Michael Cole, his voice trembling as his headset reconnected, didn't scream the name. He whispered it, a break in his professional composure that sold the moment better than any script could. "Oh my God," he breathed, the audio peaking slightly. "Wasn't supposed to be here. He's not cleared. Security, surely. Security has to stop this." But security didn't move. They parted like the Red Sea, not out of respect, but out of fear. The figure walked with a limp, a physical storytelling device that immediately told the audience this wasn't the same man who had left. He carried a duffel bag in one hand, dragging it slightly, heavy with unseen weight. He didn't look at the fans, didn't play to the hard camera. He walked with the tunnel vision of a man marching toward his own execution, or perhaps someone else's. The uneasiness in the stadium spiked into genuine tension. Fans in the front row, usually eager for a high five or a selfie, pulled their hands back. There was an aura of violence radiating from the aisle that felt unsafe. The commentary team stopped trying to explain the storyline and started narrating the human element. "Look at his eyes," Graves muttered, his healed persona dropping for a moment of raw honesty. "There's nothing behind them, no joy, no anger, just void." The figure reached the steel steps and paused. He didn't vault over the ropes, didn't pose on the turnbuckle. He slowly climbed the steps, one by one, the metal clanging, echoing in the hushed arena. He entered the ring not as a conquering hero, but as an intruder, a virus entering a healthy cell. The champion, who had been shouting at the timekeeper, turned around and froze. The contrast was jarring, the polished, tanned, baby oil-glistening champion representing the sanitized present, and this jagged, scarred ghost representing a buried past. The music cut out abruptly, leaving them in the ring with nothing but the hum of the ventilation and the terrified heartbeat of the audience. The confrontation that followed deconstructed the very format of professional wrestling. Standard procedure dictated a stare down, a microphone exchange, a shove, and a brawl. This was none of those. The intruder dropped his duffel bag in the center of the ring. The thud was audible. He stood 3 feet away from the champion, hands at his sides, open and empty. The champion, usually quick with a witty retort or a catchphrase, found his throat dry. He raised the title belt, a reflex, a shield to hide behind. The intruder simply looked at the gold, then up at the champion's eyes, and laughed. It wasn't a villainous cackle. It was a dry, wheezing chuckle of genuine pity. "You think that makes you safe?" he asked, his voice picked up by the ring microphones without him needing to hold one. The audio was raw, lacking the bass boost of the PA system, making it sound painfully intimate, like eavesdropping on a private argument in a parking lot. The crowd, realizing they were witnessing unscripted dialogue written so well it felt unscripted, fell dead silent. You could hear a pin drop in a stadium of 40,000. The champion tried to regain control. "Get out of my ring," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Security." But the intruder just took a step closer, invading the personal space in a way that signaled imminent violence. "I built this ring," the intruder whispered, loud enough for the first 10 rows to hear, the words traveling back like a wave. "And I left it to you. Look what you did. You turned a war zone into a playground." The brutality of the statement hung in the air. It was a direct indictment of the current product, a meta-commentary that struck a nerve with every cynical fan in the building. The physical explosion, when it came, was ugly. There were no wrestling moves, no suplexes, no super kicks. The intruder simply stepped in and head-butted the champion, a sickening crunch of bone on bone that caused the referee to recoil in horror. The champion dropped like a stone, clutching his face, blood instantly pouring through his fingers.
Ah!
It wasn't the majestic crimson mask of a theatrical match. It was the messy, alarming bleeding of a street fight. The crowd didn't chant holy *T. They gasped and covered their mouths. The intruder didn't stomp him. He didn't taunt. He knelt beside the fallen champion, wiped a smear of blood from the canvas onto his own thumb, and looked at it with a strange detachment. He then stood up, picked up the title belt, looked at it with disgust, and draped it over the unconscious body of the champion like a funeral shroud. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't celebrate. Simply turned and walked away, leaving the ring a crime scene rather than a stage, rewriting the definition of a moment from entertainment to trauma. The chaos that erupted the moment the intruder passed back through the curtain was unlike anything the backstage cameras had ever captured on in 2026. The cameras were always rolling for the inevitable documentary. This wasn't the usual organized chaos of a live broadcast. This was panic. Producers ripped headsets off, screaming conflicting orders. The guerrilla position, usually a hub of controlled authority, was a scene of anarchy. Triple H sat at the monitors, his face ashen, not angry, but deeply, profoundly rattled. He didn't shout. He stared at the screen showing the silent, stunned crowd, realizing the carefully curated reality he had spent years building had been shattered in 5 minutes. Agents scrambled to intercept the intruder, but as he walked down the hallway, the seas parted again. Young talent, usually eager to make a name for themselves, pressed their backs against the concrete walls, eyes wide, witnessing a level of aura they had only heard about in locker room myths. Inside the locker room, the reaction was a toxic mix of fear and resentment. The current roster, men and women who had adhered to the strict new rules of the corporate era, felt the ground shift. Who cleared him? One mid-carder whispered, clutching his phone, checking social media, which was already melting down. I thought he was done. I thought he was banned. A veteran sat in the corner, taping his wrists slowly, shaking his head. He didn't come back to wrestle, the veteran muttered to no one in particular. He came back to burn it down. The divide was instant. The younger generation saw a relic trying to steal their spotlight. The older generation saw a reckoning. The mood wasn't competitive. It was survivalist. The script for Monday Night Raw, already written and printed, was now useless paper. Meanwhile, the medical team rushed past toward the ring, carrying a backboard, selling the injury of the champion with a frantic urgency that blurred the lines further. Was it a work? Was it real? The lines had been blurred so effectively that even the people working for the company didn't know the truth. The intruder found his own dressing room, not a guest locker room, but his old one, which had been turned into storage. He kicked the door open, threw his bag on a dusty couch, and sat in the dark. No one dared to enter. No producers came with timing sheets. No writers came with promos. He sat in the silence of the backstage area, the distant hum of the confused arena still audible, isolating himself in a bubble of dangerous autonomy. The message was clear. The machine no longer controlled the parts. The part had returned to dismantle the machine. In the days that followed, the wrestling world didn't buzz it, vibrated with a nervous energy. The clip of the entrance didn't just go viral. It was dissected by body language experts, lip readers, and cultural critics. It wasn't celebrated as a return. It was analyzed as an incident. WWE stock took a volatile swing, uncertain how investors would react to a product that had suddenly turned so dark and unpredictable. The media landscape, usually complicit in the kayfabe of the modern era, found itself unable to categorize what had happened. Was this a storyline? Or was this a hostile takeover of the narrative? The silence from WWE's official channels only fueled the fire. No press release, no injury update on the champion, just a static image on the website of the bloody title belt. The consequences rippled outward into the personal lives of everyone involved. The champion, humiliated in front of millions, vanished from social media, his clean-cut image permanently stained by the visual of his helplessness. The intruder's family, long shielded from the public eye, found themselves besieged by fans desperate for answers, asking if Dad was okay, if he was back to being the bad guy. It forced a conversation about the cost of legacy. The fans, who had clamored for edge and attitude, suddenly realized the weight of what they asked for. They wanted the wolf back, but they forgot that the wolf eats the sheep. The joy of the sport had been replaced by a grim fascination. Ultimately, this entrance didn't just rewrite a moment. It rewrote the contract between the performer and the audience. It stripped away the safety net. It reminded the world that beneath the pyro, the merchandise, and the publicly traded corporate sheen, professional wrestling is, at its core, a simulation of violence and conflict, and sometimes the simulation breaks. The viewer was left not with the satisfaction of a cliffhanger, but with a lingering, uncomfortable question that would haunt the forums and the comment sections for years to come. When the lights went out and that discordant piano note hit, were we watching a performance of a broken man, or were we finally seeing the man as he truly was? The line had been erased, and we were all left standing in the dark, waiting for the next strike, no longer sure if we wanted to see it.